is Roshan Kadar. I am the publishing director at HSRC Press and the publisher of Johannesburg from the Riverbanks. And we are so delighted to be hosting the Cape Town event of this book launch. I live in Joburg. I know Mehita and Renegan from Johannesburg, so it feels great to be connecting here at a water body as well, and coming home in a different way. So it's a real pleasure for me to be here to welcome all of you. Thank you for coming out tonight. I'm seeing some familiar faces in the audience as well, which is lovely. And just to say that, this book is really, really special because it's such an interdisciplinary body of work. And the organization that I work for, the HSRC, the tagline is social science that makes a difference. And this book is such a clear example of that because it's bringing in activists, artists, academics, scientists, urban planners, to talk about our environment and how do we all work together in multiple ways, in different ways, to clean up. And this is such a great example of how, with a collective effort, collective will, something has transformed for the better, where social science does make a difference, and it's really nice when you have an impact story like that. So thank you to the volume editors, Renegan Raju and to Mehita Iqani, who are both based at Stellenbosch, working in anthropology. Mehita's working in science communication, also media, and just spearheading very interesting work. And then I have only recently met Jane and Paul Malule. So Paul works for, is it Water Warriors?
The Alex Water Warriors.
The Alex Water Warriors, and they're based in Johannesburg. And they do grassroots activism to get the communities to buy in, because there's no point in doing top-down policies, top-down academic theorizing when we need to be working together. So, the work that you're doing, we had a launch in Jukskei, in Alex, and just to see the improvement that's happened because of your passion, your commitment, your mobilizing. So thank you for that work, And Jane is in the former policy sector, having worked in the city of Joburg for a long time, and now working for
Water for the Future.
Water for the Future, thank you. So, having that kind of voice, that kind of intervention, where we need people in government, in NGOs, with grassroots communities and the academic community working together. So I'm not going to continue any further. We're going to have a very rich discussion. And also just to say, at the Joburg event, which was really wonderful, it was packed. There were like over 100 people there. And there was this one woman that came in because she had FOMO. She saw how full the bookshop was. She said, I didn't get invited to this event, but I just walked in and I didn't know anything about this river, about this project. This is so interesting. Like, how can you get this information out in more ways? And that's exactly why we also do books. And we want books to be reaching the public in that way, and having events like this in the bookstore takes the information and the knowledge and the research out to the general public. So in many ways, a success story. So without further ado, let me welcome the panel and welcome all of you to our event tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Roshan, for that wonderful introduction. My name is Mehita Iqani, and I'll just kick things off by beginning with a few words of thanks, actually. I always like to begin an event by thanking those who made possible the thing that we're gathering to celebrate. And first and foremost, I actually wanted to express our thanks to the HSRC Press. We actually did have a choice of publishers to go with on this book. And we chose the HSRC Press because we felt that there was a greater likelihood of the book reaching those not only in the general public but also in policy making. And because of the proximity that the HSRC has to government, we felt that this was the right decision for this particular book. And I just wanted to, as well as to say thank you to the wonderful publishing director, Roshan Kadar, who, by the way, I've known for more than 20 years. Also, just a shout out to the other colleagues at the HSRC Press who've made this book possible. So firstly to Mthunzi Nkawe, the commissioning editor who took on the project. And then to the production manager, Samantha Michelle Huane, who helped create the book that you will hopefully soon be able to hold in your hands and have a look at. Shanice Khan, who's here tonight, who's done a fantastic job helping to organize all of the events and get the book out there. And then the anonymous peer reviewers, who we do not know who they are, but who endorsed our book for publication. We're very grateful to them. And then 3 wonderful colleagues who endorsed the book and read the book and said wonderful things about it. Professor Isabel Hofmeyer, Professor Mucha Musemwa, and Professor Nia Niftahouden. Also, a very quick thank you, of course, to my co-editor, Renegan Raju, who's sitting right here and who you'll hear from very, very soon. And then just to acknowledge that a lot of the work that led up to this book becoming published was funded by the National Research Foundation through the South African Research Chair in Science Communication. So we acknowledge also that arm of government that funds many of us to do our research. We couldn't be doing things like this without them. And last but not least, to my wonderful colleague at Stellies, Fumani Dwara, who is here and who has helped create so many events through the SARCHI Science Communication, and who's also been pivotal in this book. Okay, so all of those thanks are now thanked, and we can get on with the show. So before I hand over to others on the panel, and we will introduce Paul and Jane with a little more detail in a moment, I just wanted to say a couple things about the book. It was a pretty mammoth editing job, and the reason it was so challenging was because this is a truly multidisciplinary volume. So the contents of this book are chapters written by over 20 authors. Some of the chapters are co-authored, and the authors came from a really wide range of disciplinary backgrounds. We first all met together in a symposium that we hosted in October 2022.
Yes.
In Joburg, at the river in Bertram's, and we invited everyone who has done anything in relation to the Jukskei River to come together and share their knowledge. So we had a collection of people from all the backgrounds you can imagine, from scientists who have been studying pathogens in the river and measuring how much litter flows past particular points, who have been figuring out policy to understand how water should be draining in the catchment area, through to artists who made work alongside the river, on the banks of the river, or in the river, or at the river, or thinking about the river, or searching for the source of the river under the city, to social scientists who have studied how people live alongside the river, whether they're unhoused people with very precarious economic conditions, or whether it's incredibly rich people setting up gated communities and estates. And we also had policymakers and people interested in the politics of the river. We had journalists who have reported on stories that happen in the river, from people who lost their lives in floods to hippos that were wandering down the river and being searched for. And of course also stories from activists, people who, and you are meeting one of the most important activists tonight, people who are working to clean up the river. And to me, it's just so striking that it is a river that brought this interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary collection of thinkers, writers, creators, activists, community leaders together. And there's something really powerful, therefore, about the river as something that connects and something that transcends also the many divisions that characterize society in our country specifically. So this leads me to think about the river not only as a body of water and as a natural phenomenon, but also as a form of communication, right? The river is something that carries information from one place to another, quite literally. The things that are washed along the river, the pollutants that are carried, dissolved into the water and carried with the river, this is information and it is moving from one place to another. And if we also think about communication as how minds connect or even hearts connect, then the river is also a way of forging connection. When we look at the case study of the Jukskei in Johannesburg, we see that it's in a city that is in many ways segregated and divided and unequal. There is actually this communicative object that stitches it together and carries information. And to me, that is a very fascinating idea about the river as a form of communication. So I wanted to just mention that as a kind of introductory set of thoughts about, why would we spend all this time looking at one river in one city? And I'm very happy to see that so many Cape Townians have come to a book launch for a book about Joburg, which perhaps underlines the point that Joburg is an important city in our country. It's a meeting place of diversity, it's the arrival point for a lot of migration. It is still our economic heartbeat. It is a very complex place, but it in many ways represents a lot of the complexities that we deal with in our entire country and perhaps also our continent. So it's worth looking at a case study in a specific river in a specific city. But really what we hope is that this book will encourage all of us to turn towards the rivers in all of our cities and towns and to ask questions about not only how can we better understand them, but also how can we protect them, because we need that water and we need it to be clean and safe. So with those introductory remarks, I'm going to hand over to Renegan to say a few words about the relation between rivers and urban studies, and we will then engage our two wonderful experts in ongoing conversation.
Wonderful, thank you so much. And thank you to all the people that Mehita thanked, and also to Mehita. This project certainly would not have been possible without funding from HSRC Chair, and also all the hard work that you did herding cats, which those of you who've edited volumes before will probably understand. The river does connect so many parts of Johannesburg, but in 2021, when I was presenting on the river as it runs through my own field site, which is a golf estate, somebody told me that I should get into contact with Mehita because she was working with activists at the very start of the river. And so I'm glad that it connected us as much as it connected Joburg. Just before we launched we launched the book for the first time in Johannesburg, I was reading a book that many of you might know, New Babylon, New Nineveh by Charles van Onselen, which is a masterful social history of early Johannesburg. And I came across the following in his foreword to the second edition, which would, in hindsight, have made an excellent epigraph to the book, but I have learned as I've published more that one comes across these things just after the publication comes out. So he writes, Johannesburg, a concrete encrustation on a set of rocky ridges, has never been loved by nationalists. Without fertile soil, striking natural vegetation, a mountain, a valley, a river, or even an attractive perennial stream, it lacks the landscape of affection or mystery easily appropriated by mythmakers and nation builders. Nature's parsimony in everything except the gold that it chose to bury more deeply here than anywhere else on earth meant that the Rand could barely offer its earliest inhabitants a subsistence existence, let alone sustain the luxury of trade in bountiful products. So a lot of that is true, right? While it may be true that the Jukskei didn't provide many commercial opportunities to Joburgers, even though it was the first place that gold was found on the Rand, nor does it have the kind of myth-making and possibilities and majesty of a Ganga or a Thames or an Amazon or the Missouri. What our edited volume tries to do is address the river that is there, loud by nationalists or not. The fact that it is there is often overlooked by Joburgers. The very little that has been written about it was scattered through newspapers, some artworks, a few journal articles, policy documents, and passing mentions in other writings. And so actually finding a way to write the history of the river was quite challenging and still certainly nowhere near complete. Our focus on the Jukskei also fits in with broader trends in urban studies. In a country like South Africa, our national identity and economic activity are so strongly tied to natural heritage. Think Fynbos on Table Mountain, the Big Five in Kruger, the Wild Coast. So it's easy to think of nature as something that's out there. For holidays, we leave our urban existences to go to the bush. And wonderful as those experiences may be, they often reinforce the highly problematic notion that living in a city is somehow living outside of and away from nature. Where we do acknowledge urban nature, it's often only in highly managed expressions, like home gardens or public parks or shopping centers on the coast. While supporting the conservation of rhinos, elephants, whales, and other charismatic species is important, there's nature that needs conserving all around us in urban environments, and that has direct effects on the health and well-being of humans and non-humans alike. One goal of this book is to encourage Joburgers and others to take note of the river and of the various ways in which the natural world changes and is changed by the making of urban space, which is what we tried to get at in our introduction with the term riparian urbanism, especially because this river is not used as a conduit for capital. We got to focus more on its watershed, on the people, animals, and structures that are on its banks, and as Jane might tell you later, the vast swaths of Johannesburg that make, from which runoff enters the river. Taking notice of nature's unpredictability, though scary and often dangerous, can also be freeing. We can finally disabuse ourselves of the notion that humankind has dominion over the environment and that we can plan and build our way out of all problems. We have to take on the task of working with the capricious agencies of more than human urban actors to make a viable future, especially in the face of climate change. That this book is as interdisciplinary as it is reflects a growing realization among academics from various disciplines studying climate change that the distinctions defining our disciplines are part of the problem. Understanding, let alone building a future in, this amorphous, complex, and bewildering thing we call climate change demands that we work across disciplines, and this book is a first attempt at that. But returning from the very theoretical concerns of abstractions like climate change, the Jukskei also offered us a wonderful opportunity to understand the famously segregated and deeply unequal city that is Joburg. It flows through virtually all of Johannesburg's social environments, from blighted inner city to affluent suburb, from prison complex to gated community, providing a through line for a city otherwise characterized by visitors, mostly in relation to its high walls. So we hope that this exhortation to understand Johannesburg through the natural features that transcend its enclaving can help reorientate us in the city and inspire new productive research endeavors. One of the places that it runs through is Alexandra Township, which, for those of you familiar with Johannesburg, is a very storied place, not always for good reasons. But Paul Malule, sitting to my left, is one of the people who's trying to make it better. And we got to see at one of our Joburg launches what he's managed to do on the banks, which he'll tell you about in a minute. But first, let me introduce him. A true son of Alexandra, Paul Malule is not just a community leader. He's a water warrior with a mission. As one of the founding members of the Alexandra Water Warriors, Paul has become a powerful voice in the fight to restore the health of the Jukskei River. What started in 2017 as a humble cleanup mission with just 4 volunteers has now grown into a grassroots environmental movement with around 3,000 committed water warriors. So, with a vision of bringing tourism back to Alex, Paul believes that environmental restoration can go hand in hand with social revival. So rather than me telling you about the Alex Water Warriors, let me ask Paul, who are the Water Warriors? Can you explain what you do? And please say a little bit more about how you've changed the banks and how you see that contributing to tourism.
Or you can just use
that one.
Yeah.
Thanks. Hi everyone, good evening. Yeah, I'm excited to be here again in Cape. My last time was before COVID. But the most important thing is the power of Cape Town. Okay. Cape Town really has power, and then I think even our president, like, I mean, you have to be strong, like, to speak about, like, another part, what is the impact that they're doing. So even myself, my first river cleanup was Black River. To learn and also to take the lessons to Joburg, but my activism I started like in 2002 after I was summit on sustainable development, and it's obviously that our biggest challenge in Alex it's a very political space and it's politically motivated, but then at the same time the diversity that is there, it's also an opportunity again. But in the reality of Alexandra Water Warriors, it came like on the right time during 2021. That was our first encounter in September 11. And personally, I took advantage that it was Heritage and Tourism Month, and then we can come together. But then during COVID, we also got an opportunity to conduct like a thorough research and development, and also like gather support system, more especially from individuals that were highly interested in making sure that we our environment in Joburg changes. So Jukskei River, there's a lot of stories, good and bad, but the reality of Jukskei River is a heritage site. And then personally, coming from a tourism background again, I felt that we need to protect Jukskei River and also to transform it and turn it into, or transform it into a tourism attraction. But then currently, what you are seeing for 4 years, it was like a fast growth. And then what is good again, it was the support system that we got from the community on its own, government and private sector, international community again. But then again, what I've learned about communities is we really need like individuals, which is like they will stand bold and ensure that we gather everybody together. So when COVID was about to end, something came to my mind to say, okay, we were all separated, but then what is going to bring us together again? So we identified the river, and we used the river to emerge from COVID and also to unite us. But then we had like a lot of issues which is like we also wanted to address as well. But then seeing that the politicians, they are not listening to us, we chose the river to make sure that there's an ear and it listens to us. But then addressing the issue of like water scarcity, it was one of the reasons, climate change, and also making sure that we start like ensuring that we use environment as the largest employer again. But then again, the issue of togetherness and working together is not as easy as like today, because some of the issues like are real, whereby some of the parts of our economy is not like in our hands. But then what can we do? Because like it's obviously like we need to make sure that we identify like some other elements of life whereby we can get relief from poverty. So one of the good things that Alexandra Water Warriors is doing is to clean our image in Alex. Because like Alex is being perceived like as a very corrupt and there's a lot of crime again. But then again, that is actually chased away like a lot of investment like in Alex. So we were struggling. Most of our community-based organizations, they are struggling to get fundings. But then it's obvious that Alexandra Water Warriors is a real process whereby at least like most of the organizations are starting to get like attention. But then on our side from the community, we are happy that we have started like working together, and then we are able now to address the issue of water scarcity. But then again, looking at like Jukskei River and its health status, it was a challenge because prior, like 1994, there were fishes, frogs, there were other species that were living on the river. But then after 1994, because there was a lot of infrastructure development, and it's obviously that our democracy at the same time is new, but then at the same time we have to learn how to make sure that we live together as different races. But then our innovation ideas and the lessons that we have learned, to be honest, is not seated within Alex. We had to rely from well-established institutions, from the research that was done by like your VET, like your University of Johannesburg, like your UNISAS. So it's obviously through that support system you also got to understand like what roles and responsibilities can you do. But then from the Water Warriors point of view, we've got 6 directors. Unfortunately, we started like at 10. We lost one. One of the directors is actually in one of the books. But then his work, to be honest, was to make sure that from the community point of view, because our first litter trap is a guy which is like they manufactured the litter trap, they installed the litter trap, and then so that litter trap, obviously, it was under also research and development from City of Johannesburg, because it's obviously anything that you have to do for government, you have to prove yourself it's okay before they fund it. But then I'm happy today that we have managed to create that sustainable working relationship between all government spheres, and then we have managed again to make sure that whatever funding that is coming to LS, it makes sense to everybody, even the funders themselves. They are happy with the model that we have introduced to say, we are not ready to handle cash, but then we can identify other HR solution companies and then the procurement companies to assist us. But then I'm happy again that from the government point of view, they also started to channel like funds from corporate companies. Like one good company, which is like, I'm not promoting them, but it's a good thing that they've done, like Coca-Cola Beverages SA. So when we were cleaning the river, our main challenge was there's the material that we were recovering. Some of it is residual, some of it is recyclable, but then we didn't have storage. And then it's obviously like we need to also to start like creating like a circular economy. So they've built like a recycling station for us. If you go online, you'll see it whereby we store our waste and then we sort it out, and then it goes to different like buyback centers. And then through that again, we attracted other fundings. We've got another electronic recycling station. But then in that, remember that we are trying to solve the number of unemployment rate, more especially from the human and youth point of view. And then now, from the tourism point of view, again, we are creating a lot of job opportunities. But then the river now, in terms of like collaboration, when we have now started like collaborating with like local artists, which is like some of the debris that we remove from the river, it is turned to the art installation. So in that, in a way, in a practical way, we are introducing ecotourism. But then I'm happy that again, like life is back at the river. We've got your red fox, we've got your meerkats, the bird life again is back. So what it was interesting again, some parts of the river, sometimes like the flamingos, they visit the spaces. So which is like, it also give like us an opportunity from the tourism practice point of view to now start like selling our packages. So yeah, let me give a chance. Thanks.
We should draw in our other panelists.
Yes. really, it's if you ever have the chance to go to Alex and to visit the Alex Water Warriors and see what they've done at that river, it is so inspiring. This beautiful green space, this pristine looking river. It's not perfect yet. I mean, there's still a lot of problems with the river, but it is really an inspiring sight. So I encourage you, if you have the opportunity to do that visit. So let me now introduce Jane Eagle, who has worked in both provincial and local government as an urban planner for many, many, many years, dealing with a broad range of issues, including housing, economic development, environmental management, spatial planning, land use management. She's here with us today because she is a director of this NGO called Water for the Future, which is doing also incredible work at the daylight point of where the river emerges from under the city into open air. But before taking on this role with this NGO, Jane served in many positions in the city of Joburg. So, we all know the city of Johannesburg is a complex and fascinating government where there are many good people trying to do good work in very, very, very difficult conditions. So Jane was one of those. She was unit head for environmental management. She has been Assistant Director for Environmental Quality Management, for Catchment Management. She's been Deputy Director for Open Space Planning and Environment and Infrastructure. I mean, there are many more things on this list. In short, this is a person with a wealth of experience in trying to make the city work. So Jane, maybe you could contribute your perspectives to this conversation and give us a sense of this NGO that you are here representing, Water for the Future. Who are they? What do they do? And what would you say are the main challenges facing the river at the site where Water for the Future is working?
Yeah.
And while she thinks about that, those of you who are at the back, you're not so formal that you can't walk in and find yourself a seat.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks. It's lovely to be here and it's lovely to see all the people that are supporting this book. First, by way of introduction, before I get to how I met Romy and how I became involved with Water for the Future, I haven't actually written anything in this book. But it's the story of the river has been completely inextricable to my entire working life at the city, because my first job was actually as an inner city planner, and the river, as Mehita said, emerges from the inner city, and it was always part of the inner city suburbs, and the problems of the river were squarely on the agenda of inner city regeneration, because the city has two systems that run, big bulk sewer and a big bulk stormwater that run in parallel from the inner city. And of course they flow into one another because it's ancient infrastructure that's deep under the ground, very difficult to fix, very expensive to fix. So that was always the burning issue, along with all the changes that the inner city was going through with invaded buildings, abandoned buildings, decaying buildings. And all that, polluted or pollutants, they were all finding their way into the river and then into a very sort of old-fashioned canalized Victorian canal, actually. So the river's buried. There were lovely romantic stories about elephants drinking from the source of the Jukskei at a spring that emerged during 2010. But it then is buried and then it emerges at what we call the daylight point in one of the inner city suburbs called Bertram's. And then I also encountered it with water quality and then later with flooding issues, which we'll talk about later, and tried to come up with, in my time, hundreds of management plans to try and fix the river and deal with some of the off-stream problems, and also to look at how we fix the drainage, all the stuff that's flowing overland from the top of the ridge to the river, which then becomes the river's problem. Everyone's focusing on the river, and I'm saying you need to look at what's happening on the top, because that's actually what arrives at the river. And there's Kirsty over there who knows better and from whom I've learned so much. So there is an ally in saving rivers. So Romy arrived at my door one day. I think she invited us to a sort of seminar, and she said, no, she and Hanneli are going to fix the Jukskei. they're going to sort it out, they're going to save the Jukskei, and that was it. And I looked at her aghast, and I think I was a cynical sort of bureaucrat saying, that is a very naive statement. You do know you need about 200 million more to fix the sewers, because it's raw sewage flowing down there, and you've got hundreds of, these litter. By that stage, I'd already built a litter trap, not Paul's kind of litter trap, a 4 million rand horrible, ugly structure, to try and save some of those rich economies like Bremer Lake from the onslaught of the inner city pollution, because they were suffering, and soccer teams couldn't even stay there during the World Cup because the smell of sewage was so bad they had to check out, and the teams couldn't even stay there. So she presented this, now I'm going to save the river. And I was very, from then on, we actually developed a conversation because I recognized something in her. She was just not to be daunted. She was not going to be swayed from her mission. And her and Hanli just set off, these two women. And bit by bit, they have just stayed the course. Hanli then took different routes. She's also still remained connected to the river further downstream. She's done some public art near the Alex Warriors site. But Romy set about learning about the river. She started harnessing a lot of specialist technical expertise, and she's a formidable, really a force of nature, and she persuaded people to help her, even pro bono. There were engineers and water scientists, and she got University of Johannesburg to do projects there, and their students were there, and she just garnered all these people to help her learn about the river. She got people donating equipment, some of our lovely friends who, to look at the quality of water going into the river. And so she just harnessed expertise, always guided by science. I have to say she's learned a lot, and she's become quite, an expert in the river. And then also, though, working with the community around her, because that community is a very impoverished community, but it also had her boss at the time and some sort of entrepreneurial businessmen trying to create one of those, a bit like a waterfront, take old buildings and repurpose them into some kind of craft and arts center, but always with environment at the core. And then, you're trying to create an economy, but you have this stinky river, which is almost raw sewage flowing, through past the buildings. So there became a synergy between what Romy was doing and what the economic imperative. But she's worked with the community, she's brought the community on board, and gradually she has started to transform the source of that river, we call it the source because it's where it daylights, into something that people can see, actually, because it was in this canal, and all the industries were just dumping stuff, and everyone was dumping stuff there. It was just the forgotten, section of the river, and now she's given it life. And the picture on the front of the book is actually from public art that she's created there. And if you go there, it's really, truly remarkable. She's created green spaces, planted trees, actually created walkways. But along with that journey, she has taught people about the river. She's made them think about water, about waste, what they're doing. And then it's kind of started with pollution, really, and trying to, give water value. But she's also become, the Water for the Future has become quite an expert NGO in alien clearing. And that has sort of dovetailed with other work that I had been championing with Romy, with Kirsty over there, which is really trying to look at how you filter water through the ground and how you transform your landscape that helps mitigate pollutants going into the river and slows water down and reduces the flooding that you get downstream. So she's currently on a real mission, and I have to say she's achieving it with the help of some funders to transform the whole head of the catchment into a kind of an indigenous green landscape, pulling out alien plants, clearing alien plants and recreating, replanting with indigenous grasses and indigenous trees. And it's quite early days, so we'll see how it sort of pans out, but it really is a transformation. And I think what I like to say, she's giving the river hope. She's giving people hope in that area because they're getting jobs, they're getting skills, they're training, they're learning. and they're getting value as people for the work that they're doing, but she's also giving hope to the river, and she's actually making people think that it's possible to start cleaning that river, and it's a formidable task. Paul talks about his successes. I, as a bureaucrat, just remember the last time I was there in Alex, and there were 20 trucks trundling in every hour, dumping rubble into that river, compacting the rubble and building 3-story illegal houses on top of unstable rubble in a floodplain. So, to me it was sort of the scale of Armageddon. I thought, I don't know where you start with this. So the fact that people actually say we're going to start and we're going to do something every day, we're going to show up here and start cleaning the river, is truly inspiring, So I'm really pleased to still be a part of this Water for the Future, because I'm a frustrated bureaucrat sitting now on the riverbanks, not able to influence the river in the way that I'd like, and all wonderful policies that we've all done as government, but you can't implement unless there's political will. But equally, the NGOs need the support of government, because really back to the message that I gave Romy, it's like you can do a lot, you can fix a lot, but you can't ultimately change sewage into water unless government comes to the party. So I'll leave it there because I can talk all night.
Thank you so much, Jane. It's so true that Water for the Future and the Alex Water Warriors give hope to the river. Jane and I were at another event this morning about the book, and were discussing afterwards that even for cynics like us, I won't speak for Jane, but I'm also very much a pessimist about efforts to change things, anything. Efforts to remediate what's happened to the river, but they even managed to warm the cockles of my cold heart. But it's particularly difficult to imagine because of the many problems with governance, right? That the democratically elected structures that are meant to deal with rubble and with waste removal aren't working despite the efforts of well-meaning bureaucrats. So I'm curious, Paul, how Water for the Future, how the Alex Water Warriors understand their role in relation to government and work with government, or sometimes, I presume, even against government in order to make life on the banks of the Jukskei livable.
Oh, okay. Say that my first job from government, it's a long history, but let me cut it short. When I worked for government in 2004, it was under social service, under probation service. So after I get bored, then I went to Department of Justice as an assessor for the courts. Then I got bored. But always I was seeing unsustainability in Alex. And I said, you know what, God, you'll help me. I cannot be government employee forever, but I need to come and make sure that I do something in Alex. But what made me happy was the connection and the understanding the policies and then how government works. So I think for me that made my life simple to really ensure that with my community that I'm working with, I explain what is government, what is corporate, and what is our role in the community. But in all that saying, my biggest opportunity again, it was information translation in different languages. So one of the good things about Alex, we speak different languages. So that is why it's easy for me if I'm encountering a Tsonga person, I could explain in Tsonga.
Oh, that's excellent.
And then if in Zulu and Sweet and all that stuff. But what we have seen again, it's most of the people that were polluting the river, to be honest, they needed to be confronted again. But then from the government point of view, where we are looking, it's the bylaws. It's not like in Cape Town, whereby the police are police, security. So that side, it's obvious the diversity, it's not easy. I need to be honest, it's not easy understanding all people from different walks, what do they want? And then we are fighting for the same space, there's no job opportunities. And it's obvious, like, hence, like, most of the people, like, they revolt, like, in illegal activities. But then that is why now we're saying that to government, look, please teachers come on board. But then it's obvious that they always have their own missions on the side. But then again, I was telling Jane that, there's uncovered corruption and crimes that were happening, like in the river, which is like we stopped that, more especially from the illegal dumping, illegal mining of sand, and also there were funds that were channeled from the Department of Water and Sanitation to the city to clean the river. But then it's obviously that I was saying again, Jane, these people are joking. I mean, you cannot like have a campaign on a clean river or like 1 day or 2 days. We need time to clean the river. So, but then on our side, what attracted like a lot of people coming to the Water Warriors, it was like the sustainability plan that we had. That at the end, when the river is clean, we're going to have tourists coming on our shores and then making sure that everybody like get job opportunities. But then I'm happy that today, at least government is setting aside funds to make sure that like we pay people. But then in saying that, I also changed like some of their thinking to say we now need to protect the river. How are we going to do that? So we have also created like the water rangers, which is like on a day-to-day basis. They are safeguarding the river. I said to government, what's the use of having green scorpions and national parks, but then our environment is suffering as well. So, but in some of the models, which is like we want to introduce in Alex, personally I'm copying from well-established cities like Cape Town and Sandton, whereby there are security guards that basically do like different jobs. They are security guards. They also give out information. They are also cleaning the environment again. So, but now I'm happy that they're from the national government, provincial, we have a working relationship, we have representation as well. They're listening to us, we're listening to them. They are following all the protocols, more especially like the compliance. So yeah, I was also tired of people talking better about government and then not doing anything. But from all those 3,000 volunteers, most of them, they were people who like almost on a day-to-day basis, they will wake up and go and bend tires. So most of them now, they understand that we need to find new ways of protesting. And it's obviously like through like discussions and like negotiations with government, it's actually like we're getting somewhere.
Thank you, Paul. You've mentioned a couple of times what you've observed and learned from places like Cape Town. I think Cape Town can also learn a lot from Alex, not least the mobilization of 3,000 people who are willing to like get their hands dirty and make things better in their own backyards.
Oh, when Helen's mayor.
So let's like kind of wrap up the conversation, but I'm going to bring it back to you, Jane, because you are in a unique position and having had so much experience working in the city of Johannesburg. And let's not make this a Joburg issue. It is a Joburg issue, but every municipality and town and city in our country has governance issues that are directly related to environmental problems and challenges. So Jane, from your perspective, there's the ideal, how should cities govern the environment better? But then also from your experience, like what are some practical ways of reaching that ideal?
So one thing that I think it comes out in the book, but this river, I don't really agree with Charles van Onselen. It's actually a really important river, and it contributes, I think I read something like over 60% of the water resource that supports Gauteng as a whole. So it's an incredibly important water resource, not just for communities who are directly taking water from the river, but actually for the whole region. So it's sort of imperative that we look after it, as you say, with most rivers. I mean, rivers are the lifeblood, and it's kind of assumed. I once sat on the Crocodile Catchment Agency to inform the formation of catchment agencies, actually for the crocodile. And I think out of 8 people on the panel, 7 people, all they spent their time doing was haggling about who was going to get the water. And I was the only one that said, are you sure there's still going to be water? Because if you don't look after the river, there isn't any water to haggle over. So that's still sort of my approach, that, we've really got government's got a role to be custodians of the river. So in the first instance, they have to get their service delivery right and their law enforcement right. And that is just the basics of fixing the infrastructure. It's very costly, it's very challenging, but you can't avoid it. I used to say, just put a 20-year plan together. Even if you can only do a little bit every year, you have to have the goal of actually getting to fix it. It's a moving target at the same time, but you have to do that. And then you have to find sites where rubble can be dumped, legally, because you can't keep telling trucks you can't leave it here, and then they say, where do we go? And there's nowhere to send them. There are some basic infrastructure issues that government just avoids. They just turn a blind eye to. And then the law enforcement, the bylaw enforcement that Paul's talking about, but also education, going to meet with taxis. You can't pour your oil down the manhole cover of a stormwater drain. You can't be throwing your nappies down the riverbank. You can't be putting wet wipes in the sewers. They're going to block and burst. So there's some basic day-to-day education, cleaners, cookers. There was a lovely project, I don't think it's in this book, but it was done by Craig from Wits, where in a very dense settlement he went and they experimented with building little silage, sort of planted silage swales above ground, so that women from households could throw their dirty water, not just on the pavement and have it go to the river, but could go through these planted layers and be clean when it came out the end. So even those little interventions, collectively they add up to such a lot of what ultimately arrives at the river. And then of course I'm a planner, so I want to go back to the basics of spatial planning and how you plan cities, and you've got to plan for space and you've got to plan for green space so that you put water back into the ground as close to where the rain is falling, and you don't shoot it all in concrete pipes and then dump it in the poor river where it just kills the river. So, trying to get that paradigm change with engineers, with city planners, who are quite receptive, but it's, as the book is a sort of cross-sectoral thing, so trying to get collective intervention across sectors in government is one of the biggest challenges, because everyone's chasing their scorecards and their targets, but to try and get them to stop a bit and actually take time to work differently, think differently, and then coordinate with their colleagues, that is really a huge challenge for implementation. But I'll leave it there again, because again I'm very passionate about this river and I could talk all night, and especially about how you manage your stormwater, because ultimately I put on spectacles one day and saw stormwater as it's transformative. You suddenly realize it's the conduit by which everything arrives in the river, from pollution to sediment to energy, and if you can manage that, you can actually do a hell of a lot for the river and make Paul's job a lot easier, because he's otherwise just trying to clean, and I'm saying let's stop it at source. If you've ever actually gone on a river cleanup, it's quite a learning curve. You pull a plastic bag out of it's half in the mud, it's stinking, it's stuck on a stick that's growing out of the bank. It takes you 10 minutes to get that plastic, half of it stays in the riverbank, and then you've got to lug it to a bag. If that plastic had been in a bin somewhere or in a recycled container back on dry land, that would have been much cheaper, more resources for society, and much less painful for everybody. So, I think you have to go back to trying to see that everything everyone's doing off stream is having an effect on the river. So, thanks.
Thanks. Stormwater and...
Rosh will handle the Q&A.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
But stormwater and runoff really mean that the entire city washes into the into the river. And before we turn to questions, I'll add that the most surprising thing that I found when I went on a river cleanup was polystyrene, because it all just shatters in the river, and you're like, how do I possibly pull out every tiny thumbnail-sized bit of polystyrene?
Can I take it? I'm being very undisciplined in this thing, but you know these little post box things now where you can send from a garage. You can go and put your parcel in a little container and it goes. Have a look at all those containers. There are boxes full of little balls of polystyrene, and it breaks my heart because when I see those, I see them in the river. So that's why we can go back to basics. Yeah.
And with that, I think we have time for a few questions.
There we go.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Don't be shy. There's one.
We can take a couple at a time.
I think everyone here is a Joburg.
Yeah, we got all the refugees.
Yeah.
And I also grew up, I learned to canoe on the Jukskei when it had parts of it had fish and birds and all that. But I'm kind of intrigued by your figure. This is really a technical question because I also have been involved in water matters for South Africa, and I understood that Joburg gets most of its water from the Lesotho dams. And I've always thought, well, maybe that's part of the reason why the Jukskei has become so bad, because it's not seen as a water source. So I'm really fascinated by you saying 60% of Joburg.
No, Joburg doesn't have.
Jane,
Do you want the...
take the mic because you're best placed to answer that.
Joburg discharges water into other catchments where other people use that water. So it's not Joburg that's drawing that water, which is precisely the problem. Because what it says. So, Water Affairs tried to develop a waste discharge charge system, a bit like Cape Town's got, that what you dump in, here you are made to draw out above or below where you're dumping. But there they tried to look at a charge to try and encourage the municipalities to clean up their act, because they were going to get a punitive charge for the water they were discharging. And they've never implemented that. I sat on committees where that was developed. It was a brilliant thing. So we, as Joburg, send that water to Hartbeespoort Dam and it becomes other people's problem. So the 60% is not what Joburg's drawing. You're right. They're getting from other sources, but they are sending that water to other people who depend on it. So, if you look at the collective and it's not just in silos, then that becomes an issue. I had great debates with Romy about this because she kept saying it's an underutilized river. And it was going in narratives, and I'm a bit of a stickler. I said it's not an underutilized river, it's just other people are utilizing it. Yeah.
And can I just to add, the one thing we didn't say is that the Jukskei is like a transnational polluter also, because it flows into the Crocodile, then into the Hartbeespoort Dam, then out the other end, joins the Limpopo, which then is obviously a boundary river, and then it ends up flowing into the ocean at Xai-Xai in Mozambique, into the Indian Ocean. So all of Joburg's filth ends up, and all water bodies are ultimately connected as well. So, yeah.
Hi, thanks everybody. It's great to see this collective happening. I'd like to understand, well, I have two very small questions. Why Stellenbosch got involved in the Joburg issue? And I'm from UCT, by the way, so that's why I'm asking. But Paul, I'm absolutely fascinated by your model.
Let's go straight to Paul.
And we've looked at quite a lot of different community models around river cleaning around the country. And the fact that you've managed to get 3,000 volunteers on this river is just incredible. The Durban model, the transformative river management model, there they've used EPWP workers largely in community cooperatives. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you managed to firstly encourage people to get involved and how you did that without some form of real payment for their services.
Before I hand over to Paul, let me give you a quick answer. In fact, when Mehita, the first conversation Mehita and I had, I was living in Vermont, and you were living in Brixton.
Sure, I'm a Joburg.
And I had done many years of research in Joburg. I never expected that I would end up in Stellenbosch, but we also don't want to think of this as just a Joburg book. It is also, we hope, a model for other rivers, perhaps the Eerste Rivier, which is now where we call, not home, but
Our place of work.
our place of work. Okay, but Paul.
Okay, firstly, I was born and brought up in Alex. Like Alex, we used to know each other before everybody comes into Alex, but then I've been always available for my community. Been into youth development, community development work, and then always like on radio, we're talking about tourism. So for us, it was basically ensuring that you also identify other role players like in LX. But then, don't get me wrong, we all become vulnerable at some point. But at first, I did mention that immediately after COVID we started, so a lot of people were vulnerable. And then what was important again, it was to start to creating like job opportunities around the river. So remember I said like we've conducted like a thorough research in terms of where is what, in terms of fundings and all that stuff. So that is why like it made it easy for us to say to the committee, no, come, you see what is going to happen. Like some of them, they were not sure, some of them, they thought we were joking. But the reality that I knew is that we had like a backing from tourism, because I know tourism, it owes like a lot of communities, a lot of resources. So, but then the reality was we use like the vulnerability from the community and from tourism. But then now I'm happy that our promises like they are true. So, but then now I'm happy that we've got other institutions that are joining in, which is our numbers also a contribution from the learnership programs, from the interns that we're getting as well. But then from the community point of view now, most or like 70% of our participants is women. And then it's obvious that we also believe that as like it's Mara Earth, we need also like our mothers to come and lead the change again. So through their expertise and then their love for the river, again, it also attracted other female figures to say like we can join in. But then like with our communication, I've done my best to make sure that we use WhatsApp group. So we've got more than 100 WhatsApp groups so that we are using to make like communication more effective. But then, so lastly to mention, we're also blessed to be loved by Daily Maverick. So like they've done a great job as well, like all these big newspapers and then television as well. But then the community, even like our logo on its own, like it actually gave us like a great deal. And like to also like to be like available for the community, like to speak the truth. But one of the truths that I told them, I said government does not owe us anything. So, and then government didn't give back to anyone. So we need to make sure that we create like a sustainable future for our children. So they did understand, because at some point we need to tell each other the truth. So the truth, it usually made them to come and participate as well. Because remember that most of the participants, there are others, they are coming from political parties, churches, because they also want the river to be clean as well. So yeah, but I can talk more and more and more. But for more information, you can just Google Alexandra Water Warriors and then we'll see all the stories that we are talking about. Thanks.
And you're welcome to talk to us more and more and more over some wine in a few minutes. So why don't we take one last question, if there is one, then wrap up.
And if there isn't, that's also... there's one.
There's one at the front.
Thanks, Davey.
Thank you, Jukskei. I just want to know what the balancing of the communities and also the cultural aspects of it, where the people were using the water for traditional functions. Did you create a reserve for that? How did you balance it?
That's an interesting one. Last year we invited Department of Water and Sanitation. They've got the traditional healers program, which is like one of the challenges, to be honest. It's like the health status of the water that they are using to baptize people and all that stuff. So within us, again, we've got traditional healers again. And then one of the stories in my book, my grandmother was one of the traditional healers in Alex. And then before all these developments, they were using the river. So the other part of the project is a very spiritual project, which is like some of us, like that is why like the issue of man, we didn't care so much, but what was important was to honor what our traditional leaders, they were complaining about, like from a traditional point of view, that some people, they had dreams that our grandmothers, they said you must come and clean the river. But then the reality of, like even today, I need to be honest, I don't like going there and cleaning the river. But now, like every day, like of my life, like since like 2021, I'm almost there every day. And I don't know why, but I find myself there. So even now, all these volunteers, like the 3,000 volunteers, we're literally talking about 3,000 families. And then from those families, like we got undermined by our children. But then I'm happy that Department of Education last year for matric June exams, they actually featured our story again, and then it also turned like the mindset of our children, and then to start acknowledging the importance of the work that they're doing. So I'm happy that we're also respecting like the cultural values in other individuals. But when we invited Department of Water and Sanitation, we're coming to warn the traditional leaders and the prophets about the health status of the river. So the opportunity that we gave them, it was for them to test the water themselves and see like what the status or what other small microorganisms like are found like within the river. So, but then with that, they actually tried like to be cautious, but there is parts of the river whereby like it's like like little clean where they go, but it's dangerous because there's also myth of like the snake and all that stuff. So some of the stories, to be honest, it's true. But then on my side, I thought at some point, because we've got water monitors as well, they're mistaken that the water monitors, it's the real snake. But then on their side, they believe that if you're not spiritual, you won't see the snake. But the other thing about the river, which was amazing for me, in LX we call it Hamampian, which means like a place of dogs. So in LX we've got a lot of dogs. So I even like complained to City of Johannesburg to say, guys, we don't have a burial site for dogs. And then the problem now is they throw them inside the river. When they do their ritual, they throw the chickens, the goats and all that stuff. So when we clean, we don't find them. So like I was surprised. So I realized that the species like the water monitors, which is like they eat this meat. So I was happy that at least there's like an ecosystem that is happening.
I'll just close off.
That's a great question to end on.